So if you find this sleep story helpful or interesting, then give it a thumbs up, leave any comments that you've got below, and if you aren't already, subscribe to the channel and click the bell icon so you can receive notifications of when future sleep stories go live. I have dozens and dozens of stories already on my channel that you can go and search. I also release new stories every single week, so I hope you enjoy this story. If you take a moment to get yourself comfortable, and you can let your eyes close. And with your eyes closed, you can just listen to me in the background. And as you listen to me in the background, I'm just going to tell you a story. And as I tell this story, I don't know whether you'll drift asleep faster to my voice or the sound of my words, or whether it'll be to the spaces between my words. And while you begin to drift asleep, I'm just going to tell a story about Hope, the blue bunny. And Hope was hopping one day through some tall grass, exploring a meadow. And occasionally that grass would tickle Hope's nose, and Hope would twitch their nose, and sometimes almost feel a sneeze coming on. And with each hop, Hope's ears would flop and bounce. And Hope just looked around the meadow while hopping through the meadow, taking in how quiet and peaceful the meadow was, noticing the daisies, dandelions, other wild flowers in the meadow, noticing butterflies fluttering from plant to plant, bees flying from plant to plant, birds in the trees occasionally flying down to the ground, and noticing how those birds sometimes drunk bits of water that had gathered in the crevice of some of the leaves before flying back up into the trees and singing their song. And as Hope hopped across the meadow towards some of those trees, they could hear the rustling leaves, noticing the way the sun beats down, warming their fur, and then the occasional breeze. And Hope hopped out of the meadow and into some woodland, and noticed the changing sounds, and the changing sounds of hopping on this drier, more solid surface, hearing that rustling, noticing the way the sunlight shines through the leaves, creating dancing shards of light on the path ahead. And as Hope hopped through the woodland, so they notice some sounds in the distance. It's a sound they've not heard before. They've never really explored outside this meadow. They've never been this far into the woods. And they decide to explore that sound. And it's a strange sound, a sound they're really not used to. Then after a while, getting closer and closer to that sound, they notice movement in the distance. And then they see the most friendly looking animals. And they see these 2 foxes and a little fox cub just playing in the distance. And they hop along towards those foxes. And then one of the foxes introduces themselves and asks who they are and where they're going. And they say that they're just exploring, they've never really been this far. And it was such a nice day they felt like going on an adventure. And up close, Hope noticed how bushy their tails seemed. And the foxes and Hope continued walking and talking and sharing their different experiences. Hope sharing what life's like out in the meadow. The foxes sharing what life is like in the woodland. The different places that are worth exploring. And then Hope noticed the sound of water flowing in the distance. And Hope decided to go and explore that sound, and so left those foxes, said goodbye, knowing that they'd made some friends they might see again later. But for now they wanted to go and explore and find that water. And as they continued to hop through the woodland, so that sound of running water got louder and louder. And then they could notice that smell of water, that clean and fresh water smell. And they arrived at a babbling brook, with the water flowing over stones and rocks, watching twigs flow and weave downstream. And they decided to follow that water, see where it led. And they touched the water to see what it felt like, and noticed it felt cold, and they assumed it must have flowed down from the mountains that are off in the distance, perhaps starting as snow on the top of the mountain, flowing down, increasing in speed, and gradually carving this path. And Hope was curious where this path leads. As they follow this water downstream, and at certain points sunlight would shine through the trees above and would glisten on the water, and at some points that water would drop down over a mini waterfall, and so the light would illuminate the spray from that water, creating a rainbow. And Hope was fascinated by these mini rainbows at the waterfalls and continued to follow that. And Hope looked down that water to try and see how far it went. And it seemed to go on as long as they could see. And then they found the bark of an old tree lying by the stream. And they decided that would be a quicker way down. And using their nose, they nudged that bark over into the water. And they quickly leapt on that bark just as the whole thing was into the water before it shot off. And then by leaning left and right to keep it steady to navigate down the stream, they rode down that stream fast-paced on that bit of bark. And as it leapt over waterfalls, so some spray splashed up on their fur, splashed up onto their nose. And they could see that there was some light down there, off in the distance. And they realised they're gradually getting to their destination, getting to the end of this stream. And then with one last jump over a waterfall, that bark lands down in a pool of water that's just gently flowing and curving around, turning that bark as it floats across that pool. And then there's just a little trickle coming from this pool, heading off towards a calm sea. And Hope has never been this far, has never seen the sea before. And they paddle over to the shore, climb off that bark, and feel that sensation for the first time of padding through sand, and noticing how padding through that damp sand feels so different to the meadow, to walking through the woodland. They notice the way that with each step they take, the sand lightens up beneath their feet, and their feet sink gently into that sand and makes a slight crunchy, grindy sound. It's a really pleasant sound and feeling as their feet move through that sand. And as they walk away from the pool, so they notice the sand becoming drier, more powdery, more solid. And then as they walk down further onto the beach, they notice the sand changing again. And they notice how now their feet are sinking into powdery, soft, dry sand. And that with each little gust of breeze, some of that sand blows up in their face and gets on their fur, as does some smell of the salty water from the sea. And they can hear that sea gently rolling onto the shore, and then gently pulling back out from the shore. They decide to walk down. They've never seen the sea, so they decide to walk down to that sea. Feel what the sea feels like. And the beach is very, very flat at this area. And so that water rolls in a long way with each wave, and then rolls back out a long way with each wave. And they notice the way the front of the water just seems to be curved over, and almost clinging on to the sand that it's moving over, with a row of bubbles. And they walk down to that water, and they notice again how that sand changes and becomes more like it was by the pool, where the sand looks dark, but every time they take a step, their feet sink into the sand, and the sand lightens under the weight of their feet. And then they see this gently bubbling wave of water just passing so softly across the surface of the sand, just a tiny bit above the sand, rolling from that sea across that sand. And they watch as it approaches, they watch as it passes under their head and across their feet, and they carry on watching as it passes past their back feet. And they notice that tickling feeling of that water, the temperature of the water, the sensations of that water, the way it moves just a little bit of sand around their toes before pulling back out, reversing that process, and then heading back out towards the ocean. And they continue to walk towards that sea. And each wave that rolls in doesn't really come much higher up their feet because of how flat this area of sand is. It just washes over their feet, tickling their feet, and then pulling back out again. And as they get closer to the seashore, so the sound of the sea gets louder. But there's that same bubbling, gentle splashing and sploshing of those waves. And they notice, looking out to see a little bit, the way a little out from the shore, the waves curl over and then splosh down, the way the sunlight glistens and shines through those waves. Noticing way the water turns bubbly and white as those waves curl over, so gently and relaxed, and so calmly and slow. And they decide to walk along the edge of this shore and explore the beach and see what else is along here. And they notice as they walk along the shore that there are more rocks further along the shore, that where they started it was very sandy, there was just that pool of water that they came out of. And then, almost like fingers of water, weaving from that pool down to the ocean. But further along, this seashore became more rocky. And as they hopped along the seashore, they found a shallow pool of water, and with every wave that came in, a little bit more water was added to the pool, and seemed to just about keep that pool topped up. And they looked in that pool, and they'd never seen sea creatures before. But through the shimmering surface of the water, they could see crabs, and the way those crabs moved sideways would suddenly stop, and then wiggle their bums and burrow themselves down into the sand. And then they'd see them wiggle and work their way out of the sand, and using their pincers to grab little bits of food passing by. And then they notice suddenly some movement at the corner of their eye. And they think they see some movement where they can just see a rock. And then they notice what they thought was a bit of vegetation in this pool, and realise that there's a creature there as it suddenly changes colour and seems to push off and dart across the pool to the other side before suddenly looking like a rock again. And they noticed that it had suckers on its legs, and they'd never seen an octopus before, and were fascinated by the way it so easily seemed to camouflage itself, seemed to move around this pool and just blend in wherever it landed in an instant. And they noticed a starfish in this pool, and at first they wondered whether it was a living creature or not. It just seemed so solid and stationary. And then they saw the movement of its legs and saw it searching that pool. And they realised that all this life in this pool, there's a whole ecosystem that probably is in the ocean when that water is over here. But then it's like a little village all of its own when the sea is out. And they wanted to put their paw in the pool and touch some of these creatures, but they're unsure, especially one that just seemed like a creature they were familiar with from their meadow, with the hedgehogs, and the way the hedgehogs would roll into balls, and you wouldn't want to give them a big hug, because although they wouldn't mean it, their spines would stab into you. And they saw in this pool what looked like a creature that had spines on it, and they thought it would be best to keep away from that it may not mean to hurt them, but you can't just go hugging something spiky and expect not to get hurt. And they're fascinated by all this unusual life in such a small space. And they could see off in the distance, further down the beach, there was someone walking a dog. And then they'd throw a ball, and that dog would bound over the waves, leaping over each wave as it came in, almost like each wave was a jump. And it would get a certain distance out, and not seem to be able to leap high enough to make it over each wave, and would just splash straight through a wave to get its ball that would be floating in the water. And then it would run back to the human, drop the ball on the ground, stand back a few paces, and then wiggling around and moving with anticipation and staring at the ball, would wait for them to pick it up and then throw it again. And occasionally the rabbit noticed that when they threw the ball, they didn't actually throw the ball, and the dog would make a few leaps before realizing, and then would stop, turn and look back at that person, and notice the person still has the ball. And that rabbit just watched that, and watched the way that dog seemed to be so in tune with that human, and the relationship they seemed to have. That they both seemed to feed off of each other's body language. And then the bunny decided to hop away from the shoreline a little bit, to hop up the bank at the back of the sand, through that rough grass and vegetation, through vegetation with broad leaves, noticing seagulls overhead, circling, making a noise, and noticing some little birds darting in and out of the vegetation and the grass. And as they went up that bank, they noticed how that sand changed again. How it was just wispy sand between the vegetation. And from on top of the bank, they turned to survey the ocean, noticing the way the sun now is beginning to set low over the horizon, creating a golden orangey glow across that blue, calm ocean. Noticing a boat just bobbing gently out to sea. And they looked around behind them. They could see the back end of the woodland they'd passed down through. They could see mountains off in the distance. And they could feel that breeze on their fur. And they decided just to relax down for a bit as that sun set, to watch that sun setting so peacefully over the horizon. and they tucked themselves into a bit of vegetation and gazed out to sea, hearing that distant sound of the waves rolling up onto the shore. Dog walker and the dog, having gone off from that walk, and they began to drift and float asleep. And as they drifted and floated asleep, they started to think about their journey home, and the fact that it was easy to make it downstream, riding on some bark, but they're going to have to make it back upstream to head home, and it's uphill all the way. And they're imagining that it would be so much easier if they were a human and they had longer legs, because they know many humans hike these long distances, that humans are so much bigger than they are as a rabbit. And they imagined what life as a human must be like. That this human they saw today had a friend's dog, and the human probably has human friends as well as animal friends. The bunny wondered whether humans have bunny friends, and what other friends humans have. And as they drifted and floated asleep, they began to imagine themselves as a human, imagining a life as a human, leaving that beach with that dog, getting into one of those metal vehicles and going someplace else. And they'd seen what human homes look like, although they'd never actually been in one. They'd only seen from the outside. They'd once poked their head into a tiny entrance in a human door, and they think the entrance was for an animal that lived there. And so obviously an animal living there needed to be able to come and go. And so they had their own door in the door. But it wasn't their place to live, so they just poked their head in and had a look. And they now imagined what it would be like to be that human. They imagined arriving home, the dog running around, jumping on all the furniture, the human asking them to just sit quietly for a bit, and eventually the dog deciding when they're ready that they'll turn around a few times and make sure their bed is just right before relaxing down into it, resting their head on their front paws and drifting off asleep. I imagine the human sitting at a table, piecing together a picture in front of them. The humans they'd seen used to do this. For some reason, they would take a picture that's in many pieces, and even though the picture seems to be on the box that the picture came out of, they would seem to want to put the pieces together, just as it is on the box. And they wonder why humans do that, when they already know what it looks like. Because when they do it, they seem to just do it, and then take it to pieces again and put it back in the box, and then just put the box on a shelf. And in the dream, the bunny tries to get a sense of why a human would do that, why a human would devote so much time to completing a task that almost as soon as they've completed, they put everything back how it started, as if they hadn't even done it. And they once saw a human just standing around, and other humans were watching them. And that human just seemed to be moving their hands around. They seemed to be trapped in a box. And Hope remembers trying to help and hopping over. And Hope didn't seem to bump into this box the human was trapped in. But the human tried to shoo Hope away. And Hope wondered why the human was trying to shoo them away, when they're just there trying to help them get out of this box they seem to be trapped in. But they couldn't see this magical box. It seemed to be almost like a force field. And then no sooner was that human out of the box, and they seemed to be trying to pull on some rope. But no matter how hard Hope looked, they couldn't see that rope that the human was trying to pull on. And yet they looked like they were sweating. They looked like it was such hard work. So much hard work they even leant against a wall. And Hope remembers wondering why they couldn't see what this human obviously could see and experience. And Hope had never seen a mime before and didn't understand what they were doing. And all these other humans just stood around clapping and laughing. And Hope just wanted to help. And one day back in the meadow, Hope remembered seeing some children playing. And they were kicking the ball to each other. They're running around that meadow. And they'd kick a ball from one to the other, run a bit further along, and then kick a ball to the one who's further ahead. And then one day the ball went over a fence out of the meadow and into a nearby field. And the kids ran to that field and stopped at the fence. And the other side of the fence was a bull that was much bigger than they were, had horns, and was almost nose to nose with them at that fence, so close to each other they could feel its breath. And Hope could see that those kids were hoping the bull would kick that bull back through the fence. But instead, it kicked it backwards, further into the field. Then it turned around and went after that bull. And it started kicking that bull around. And although it was probably really just kicking that ball around randomly. Hope had this feeling like there was some level of skill to what it was doing, that it almost seemed to be in the zone, so focused on enjoying playing with that ball, kicking it from one foot to the other, being so dainty and graceful with it, despite the fact that the slightest bit of weight would crush or explode that ball. And the children stood just outside the field. Didn't seem to really know what was going on. They just watched in disbelief. And no sooner had that bull started, and it then just kicked that ball towards the children. It went up and over the fence. The children chased after it into the meadow, and that bull just carried on eating grass as if nothing had happened. And the bunny, Hope, wondered whether this is what human life is like. A bunch of experiences that are random, that humans are constantly trying to interpret and work out, and trying to understand other animals and the meaning from those other animals and the communication from those animals, because they obviously can't talk to the animals. And Hope was really curious about this idea, because Hope can't talk to humans, and yet as animals they seem to just instinctively understand each other and be able to communicate with each other. And as the night continued on, so around Hope were the sounds of crickets and nighttime sounds, that distant sound of the sea rolling on the shore. And they woke up the next morning to the sounds of birds, to the morning sun shining on their face, and to this strange sound, the kind of sound of music and a vehicle, and then noticing in the distance that there's a truck that seems to be selling food, and then people walking away from that truck holding ice creams. And Hope watched and observed, and had found themselves becoming something of an observer of behaviour, and quite like this journey out from their familiar meadow, from that familiar surrounding. They're not normally brave enough to venture outside their familiar surroundings, and so they're so happy that they took that risk to go and explore, that now they're in a position to see something they never would have seen before, to see people turn up to get cold food on a warm day and gain so much pleasure from it, that it didn't just seem to bring them pleasure with the eating, but it also seemed to enhance the relationship between these people as they bought each other ice cream, talked about the ice cream, watched as the ice cream melted in each other's hands, keeping an eye on each other's ice cream for each other, to try and let people know their ice cream is beginning to drip, or is about to drip. And then the other one would quickly lick that ice cream up and prevent that dripping. And it seemed to be a whole interactive process. Not like when they eat, where they just eat some grass with their head down. They don't pay attention to anyone else or anything else. And then when that bit of grass in front of them has gone and been eaten down, they move on to another bit of grass. And it's not an interactive process. It's not a relationship building process. And Hope knows that they're soon going to have to find their way back to the meadow and figure out what the best route back is. They know they came down the stream, and they know it's uphill all the way to walk back up that route. But they're currently up, slightly above the sea on this bank, and they can see the back end of the woods. And they think they know a shortcut, perhaps into the woods, and they know that they'll encounter that stream at some point, and that when they do encounter the stream, they can just follow it from that point back to where they started. But to get to the back end of the woods, they have to walk through more of an unknown area. And as they walk through that unknown area of tall grass, where nothing seems to really be cut down here, it's all wild and overgrown, and the grass is all thick. It's not that soft grass of the meadow. And a lot of the vegetation around here is leafy vegetation with a few darker plants, unlike the meadow's lighter plants. And there are fewer butterflies and bees in this area. But they do notice a few other animals. They can see a deer off in the distance, standing tall in this area, that seems to be better able to eat this food, and better able to chew this food. And they feel that they wouldn't be able to do that themselves. And they hop towards the backside of those woods. And as they hop towards those woods, so the sun keeps passing across the sky. And as that sun passes across the sky, they notice the way their shadow moves around, almost disappearing while the sun's overhead. And the most warmth is felt on their fur. And then they encounter a strange looking squirrel. And what makes this squirrel seem so strange? It makes them wonder whether perhaps they've been hopping in the sun too long. Is that it seems to have a little purple cape and a pointed purple hat. And the squirrel tells them that he's a wizard and that he can grant wishes and make magic happen. And Hope says, "I'd like you to do some magic for me then." And the squirrel says, "Okay, I'll make the sun disappear," and flicks its tail behind it. And then the sky turns darker. And initially, Hope is surprised by this. And then the sky begins to clear and the sun shines again. And then Hope thinks, "Hang on a minute, I think that was just a cloud going across the sky." And the squirrel says they're not going to repeat the same thing twice, and that you'll never know. But the squirrel then comes up to Hope and says to Hope that they're going to grant them a gift. A gift that's something that they've wanted for a long time. Something that will help them feel better and heal them from the inside out. And the squirrel lifts up Hope's front legs and stares at those front legs while doing that. And then gently touches Hope on the shoulders, and then gently strokes the head. And Hope feels themselves focusing, feels that gentle touch, so gentle, it's almost like not being touched. And then notices their peripheral vision dimming as all their focus is on that squirrel. And has this sense of a healing light with the warmth of the sun passing in through their head, down around their face, around their ears, down their neck, their shoulders, down their legs, and their body, all the way down to the tip of their tail. Almost like there's a healing sense of compassion and love being passed from that squirrel into Hope. And Hope begins to feel a sense of hope. A sense that something internally has changed. That muscles have softened and relaxed. And then that squirrel steps aside, taps Hope on the shoulder, and as if nothing at all has happened, just says goodbye and tells Hope to continue that journey. And Hope continues hopping, feeling a bit confused at first, a bit dazed, wondering what had just happened, but feeling like something had changed within them. And before they knew it, they'd already hopped almost all the way to the woodland. And they hopped into that woodland, and then noticed that night was beginning to set in. And as they hopped into the woodland, so they noticed the way the moon had begun to shine in the sky. and that now the occasional shard of dancing light through the trees was a brilliant white from the moon, and everything in the woodland seemed to have a slight blue tinge to it. And Hope had good eyesight. He could see well in the dark, and just seemed to be hopping along with this deep sense of relaxation, almost like the body was on autopilot, and yet the mind was elsewhere, like the body was just carrying out tasks, and the mind was finding the experience so effortless. And Hope noticed a lizard scurrying up a tree into a hole in the tree to settle down for the night. Could hear a hooting owl, and could see an owl sitting in a tree, just acknowledging that they're there, as if to say good evening. And then Hope found that fox family again, and they looked like they were having fun. They're more active in the evening than they seemed to be during the day. And then continued through that woodland, all the way back out into the meadow. And then out in the meadow, Hope knew they had to just find their way home to settle down for the night. And they could hear the last sound of the church bells ringing in the evening in the distance of the nearby town. And the tallest building in the town was the church. And as they heard the church bells, so they gazed over towards that church. And they could see the moon moving behind the church as they hopped. See the weather vane on top of that church, just pointing to alert the direction of the wind, and finding that chiming sounds in the distance in some country gardens as the breeze blows through those gardens, finding sounds of the bells just so relaxing as they head into a hedge, through that hedge, and then into a hole, and down in that hole they find their bed, and they feel like they've had such a long journey over the last couple of days, and they can feel a slight ache of their muscles from the amount of hard work they've done, all that hopping about. And as they begin to drift asleep, they focus on softening their muscles, releasing that tension, deepening, slowing their breathing, relaxing the muscles around the neck, the shoulders, the legs, through the body, softening, relaxing, releasing tension, releasing any discomfort, breathing in more comfort, having a sense of that squirrel and what that squirrel had told them. And then as they think about that squirrel, having a sense of the healing light passing down through their head, filling their body with each breath, almost tingling its way down through them, passing into all parts of their body, almost like it's healing as it goes, into each cell, and breathing out any tension or anything not wanted in the body, knowing that by the next morning they'll awaken feeling so refreshed, so comfortable through their body and their mind, through their head, their legs, their body, all the way to the tip of their tail, knowing they now have the confidence to explore new places and discover more in the future, and to meet new people, new animals, and enjoy a life journey of curiosity as they drift and float deeply and comfortably and relaxed asleep.